A fire swept through, taking his house. Yet, a tale of hope, leadership, and a legacy, though not done, was burning with full intensity. Marco loved Los Angeles in all its chaotic glory. The city wasn't perfect, the traffic could drive a saint mad and the air was always faintly hazed, but to Marco, it was home. He had established his home with Adriana, his high school sweetheart, and their 2 kids, Sophia and Daniel. Their house is located in a small village just outside the city, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a mini garden where Adriana grows tomatoes and sunflowers. The kids often play tag at the lawn while Marco works on his car or grills carne asada for Sunday dinners. Life wasn't lavish, but it was stable. That stability was shattered on a scorching September afternoon. The sky darkened in a way that didn't make sense for midday. Marco stepped outside and saw it, a huge plume of smoke rising in the distance. At first, it felt like another wildfire far enough away not to worry about. But as the hours ticked by, the wind changed and the distant menace became a very real terror. By nightfall, ash rained from the sky like snow, blanketing their yard in a ghostly gray. Marco turned on the news, his heart sinking with each word from the reporters: mandatory evacuations, rapidly spreading flames, and a growing list of homes lost. When the warning came for their neighborhood, there was no time to think. "Grab the essentials!" Marco shouted, trying to stay calm for Adriana and the kids. They scrambled to pack what they could: family photos, important documents, the kids' favorite toys. As they piled into the car, Sophia clutched a worn stuffed bear, tears streaming down her face. Driving away, Marco stole one last glance at their home. Flames were already licking the edges of the street, and the heat was suffocating even inside the car. Adriana squeezed his hand tightly, her voice trembling. "We're together. That's all that matters." They spent the night in a crowded evacuation center. Marco barely slept, his mind replaying the chaos over and over. The next morning, they got the confirmation they had been dreading: their home was gone. Everything, the memories, the keepsakes, the place where their children had grown up, reduced to ashes. The following days were nothing short of a haze. The children tried to take in everything while adjusting to reality, but Marco saw it tolling on his children. The smile did not come across as often from Sophia, and Daniel clung on to Adriana every chance he had. Marco felt like he was failing them, unable to provide the security they needed. Work at Tesla became his one escape. He flung himself into his tasks, hoping the monotony of the assembly line would drown out the noise in his head. He didn't talk much about the fire with his coworkers; it was easier to keep his pain tucked away, hidden behind polite nods and forced smiles. But no matter how hard he pushed to move on, the weight of what they had lost weighed upon him still. It lingers in the silence, in the emptiness that once was a life they made together. When things seemed hopelessly dark down that road ahead, it only took one conversation to turn the course of events in a way Marco would never have planned. Marco always kept his head down and did his job. Tesla was the sort of place that prided a man on getting things right in terms of accuracy and efficiency. Although he lost his home, personal problems never stood a chance of leaking into Marco's work. In fact, now that his family needed the money more than ever, he should do just enough. Still, it was impossible to keep his situation completely under wraps. Colleagues started to notice how tired he looked, the shadow of worry in his eyes. A few offered quiet words of sympathy when they overheard him on the phone with Adriana, trying to coordinate temporary shelter for their family. One afternoon during lunch in the break room, a coworker named Louise asked how Marco was holding up. Marco hesitated, unsure if he wanted to open up, but the genuine, any concern in Louise's voice broke through his usual wall of silence. "It's tough," Marco admitted, his voice low. "The kids are struggling, Adriana's trying to stay strong, and I just don't know how we're going to rebuild." Little did Marco know, that conversation was the spark that set the next chapter of his life in motion. Word of his situation spread among his colleagues, eventually reaching a supervisor. They, in turn, passed the story up the chain. It wasn't long before Marco's plight reached someone far beyond the factory floor: Elon Musk himself. A few days later, Marco was called into the office by his supervisor. His mind raced with possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Was he being let go? The wildfire had left him with no backup plan, and the thought of losing his job made his stomach churn. When he walked into the room, the supervisor handed him a tablet with a video call already in progress. On the screen was Elon Musk. Marco froze, momentarily stunned. He had seen Musk's face in interviews, news articles, and company-wide announcements, but this felt different. He was the man on the screen, but not the visionary CEO. Just a person. Gazing at Marco with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Marco," Musk said, his tone surprisingly soft. "I've heard about what you and your family have been through. I can only imagine how tough this must be." Marco swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Thank you, sir. We're managing as best we can," Marco replied. Musk nodded thoughtfully. 6 years with Tesla, right? He asked. "That's a long time. Your work ethic and commitment haven't gone unnoticed." "Thank you," Marco replied, unsure what else to say. Then came the words that left Marco speechless. "I want to help," Musk continued. "We have temporary housing available at one of our facilities. I'd like to offer it to your family, no strings attached. And beyond that, Tesla will cover some of your immediate expenses: food, clothes, whatever you need to get back on your feet." Marco felt a lump rise in his throat. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he managed to hoarsely say, This is more than I could have ever hoped for. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Musk smiled faintly. "You've been part of this company for years, Marco. You're part of the Tesla family, and family takes care of each other." The call ended, but Marco sat in the chair for several minutes, unable to move as relief, gratitude, and disbelief washed over him in waves. When he told Adriana later that evening, she broke down in tears, her sobs a mix of exhaustion and newfound hope. The next day, Marco and his family moved into the Tesla facility. It wasn't their old home, but it was safe, warm, and filled with a kind of hope they hadn't felt in weeks. The kids ran around, exploring the space, their laughter echoing through the halls. For the first time since the wildfire, Marco allowed himself to breathe. Little did he know, this act of kindness was only the first step in a journey that would change his life forever. The Tesla facility wasn't just a roof over Marco's head, it became a sanctuary for his family in their time of need. The rooms were modest but comfortable, with enough space for Adriana to create a semblance of home. Sophia and Daniel quickly adapted, their laughter filling the hallways as they raced around with newfound energy. For the first time in weeks, Marco saw the light return to his children's eyes. But for Marco, adjusting wasn't as easy. Though he was grateful, a nagging voice in the back of his mind questioned whether he deserved this generosity. He tried to repay the kindness by throwing himself into his work, often volunteering for overtime or helping less experienced co-workers troubleshoot issues on the line. It wasn't about recognition, it was about earning what had been given to him. One crisp morning, a message from his supervisor interrupted Marco's routine. Elon Musk was coming to visit the factory, and he wanted to meet Marco in person. The news left Marco both nervous and intrigued. Why was Musk taking such an interest in him? When the day arrived, the factory buzzed with a mix of excitement and anticipation. Musk arrived unannounced, dressed in his usual understated manner. Despite the entourage of executives and security around him, he had a casual air as he walked through the factory floor, stopping to greet employees and ask questions about their work. When Musk reached Marco, he extended a hand with a genuine smile. "Marco, good to finally meet you," he said. "Likewise, sir," Marco replied, his voice steady despite the nerves building in his chest. Musk gestured toward a quieter corner of the factory, away from the hum of machinery. "Mind if we chat for a minute?" As they stood near a row of newly assembled vehicles, Musk's tone shifted to something more personal. "I've been following your story since I first heard about what happened to your family. How are they holding up?" Marco hesitated, unsure how much to share. We're doing better. The kids love the space, and Adriana's been amazing through all of this. It's been hard, but we're grateful for everything you've done for us." Musk nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I can't imagine losing everything like that. It's a testament to your strength that you've kept going." Marco wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments like that didn't come often, and he felt the weight of them. "You just do what you have to for your family," he said finally. Musk studied him for a moment, then asked, What's been the hardest part? The question caught Marco off guard. He paused, searching for the right words. It's not just the house, he said slowly. It's the feeling of being uprooted, like the foundation of everything you've built is just gone. Musk nodded again, his expression softening. That's what we're trying to prevent, not just rebuilding structures but rebuilding lives. Your story reminds me why Tesla exists, not just to innovate but to help create stability in an unstable world. That conversation marked a turning point. Musk's interest in Marco went beyond sympathy, it felt personal, like he truly wanted to understand. Over the next few weeks, Musk reached out regularly, asking about Marco's family and checking in on their progress. But it didn't stop there. One day during a factory-wide meeting, Musk introduced a new initiative, Tesla's Wildfire Relief Project. The company would not only provide solar panels and batteries to affected areas but also work to create sustainable solutions for communities devastated by natural disasters. Musk continued. Marco's name came up during the announcement, much to his surprise. I've been inspired by Marco's resilience, Musk told the room. His story reminds us that we have the resources and responsibility to make a difference. I'm asking Marco to help lead this effort to ensure we're not just fixing things temporarily but building something lasting. Marco's jaw nearly dropped. Him, lead an initiative? It felt unreal, but the applause from his co-workers told him it was real enough. After the meeting, Musk approached him privately. I know this might feel overwhelming, he said, but you've already shown what you're capable of. You've lived through this. You know what people need. Marco took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling in. If this helps people like my family, I'll do everything I can, he replied. Musk clapped him on the shoulder with a rare smile. That's all I ask. And with that, Marco stepped into a role that would challenge him in ways he never imagined but also give him a purpose greater than he had ever known. Marco's life changed overnight. As he entered this new role, he was no longer just a line worker at Tesla, he was now entrusted with helping lead an initiative that could change the lives of thousands impacted by wildfires. The magnitude of the responsibility wasn't lost on him, and though he felt out of his depth, he was determined not to let anyone down, especially not his family. They were daunting at first. Marco found himself sitting in rooms full of engineers, designers, and community planners, many of them holding master's degrees and accumulating decades of experience on their resumes. At first, he wondered if he belonged there, even a guy like him, who'd spent his entire career on assembly lines. But Musk was right, Marco's experience came from a unique perspective. He understood not only the technical but also the human side of things. When the team discussed deploying Tesla's solar panels to disaster areas, Marco was the one to remind them about practical issues, like how hard it is to install equipment when roads are blocked or when survivors have nowhere to sleep. We need to think about the people on the ground, he said during one brainstorming session. It's not just about power, it's about making sure they feel like they can rebuild. His input became invaluable. Soon, Marco was working side by side with engineers to design mobile units equipped with Tesla batteries and solar panels. These units could run small shelters, charge cell phones, and even provide refrigeration for food and medicine. Marco refused to make the device complicated, especially since in a disaster, people don't have time for complicated hookups. As prototypes began rolling out, Marco personally traveled to some of the hardest-hit areas to oversee their actual deployment. Among the first stops was a temporary shelter in Ventura County. The first unit powered on and lit up a dimly lit room where families had gathered, and Marco was observing the wonder light up children's faces. The parents thanked him through tears, and for the first time, Marco felt the weight of his efforts paying off. But Marco's vision didn't stop at just providing power. He pitched an idea to the team that took Tesla's involvement even further, converting and used Tesla semis into mobile relief stations. These trucks could carry food, water, and medical supplies to areas where infrastructure had been wiped out. Engineers and designers rallied behind the idea, and within weeks, the first fleet of trucks was on the road, bringing aid to places that had felt forgotten. Marco's days are long and tiresome, yet at the same time, those days are perhaps the most meaningful he has had so far. He spends long hours in meetings, evenings listening on calls to community leaders, and weekends spent touring disaster sites. Adriana constantly worries about how much he's pushing himself but sees the fire in his eyes that she hasn't seen since before the wildfire. "You're making a difference," she told him one night as they sat on the porch of the Tesla facility. "I've never been prouder of you." Her words kept him going even on the hardest days. And there were plenty of hard days. Some areas were so devastated that even Marco struggled to find hope. He saw families huddled in tents, children who hadn't smiled in weeks, and elderly people who'd lost everything they'd spent a lifetime building. But amidst the devastation, there were glimmers of resilience. Marco met volunteers who worked tirelessly to help strangers, firefighters who stayed on the front lines for weeks, and survivors who shared stories of determination. Those moments reminded him why he had taken on this role in the first place. As the initiative gained traction, Musk became more involved, often checking in on Marco's progress. During one such meeting, Musk proposed an idea that caught Marco completely off guard. "Marco," Musk said, leaning forward across the table, "I want Tesla to fund a community center in one of the hardest-hit areas. A permanent space where people can come for support, resources, and even hope. And I want you to lead the effort." Marco stared at him, stunned. "A community center?" Musk nodded. "It's not just about immediate relief, it's about rebuilding. We can't replace what people lost, but we can give them a foundation to start again. And you understand that better than anyone." The enormity of the task hit Marco like a tidal wave, but he couldn't say no. "If we can make this happen, it could change lives," he said quietly, the weight of the moment sinking in. Musk smiled faintly. "Then let's make it happen." Marco left the meeting with a mix of excitement and fear. Building a community center was unlike anything he'd ever done. IT wasn't just logistics or technology. It was something more, something he wanted to live beyond him, something that stood as a monument of resilience to be remembered in years to come. But it would take far more than the determination of Marco to make it happen. It would take a community ready to rise from its ashes. Marco had never led a project like this before, but something deep inside told him this was his calling. The idea of a community center, a place where people could find hope and resources, felt personal. He couldn't stop thinking about the night he'd fled his home with Adriana and the kids, unsure if they'd ever find stability again. If it was a lifeline to someone else, then everything was worth it. The site had been identified, a block of land about 2 miles outside Santa Clarita, surrounded by devastated neighborhoods by the wildfire. Marco worked very closely with the engineers and architects of Tesla to make sure this wasn't a just functional but warm space. The center would include multipurpose rooms for counseling and job training, a childcare facility, a food pantry, and even a small library. Marco insisted on adding a memorial garden, a quiet place where survivors could reflect and honor what they'd lost. Construction began swiftly, and Marco threw himself into the project. He spent his days networking with contractors and volunteers, his evenings poring over blueprints, and his nights composing emails to solicit more donations. It was hard labor, but it was progress. Walls began to rise where ashes lay, and soon the skeleton of the building took shape. The initiative spread rapidly, local news stations picked up the story, emphasizing Marco as the driver of the effort. Donations poured in from individuals and businesses alike, many moved by Marco's resilience and determination. Adriana often joked that their mailbox was fuller than it had ever been, overflowing with letters of encouragement and checks from strangers. One morning, as Marco walked the construction site with his youngest, Daniel, the boy tugged on his hand. "Is this where the people are coming to play, Papa?" he asked, pointing towards the area indicated for the playroom. Marco crouched down and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "That's right," he said, "children like you will come here and feel safe again." Tears welled in his eyes as he thought about it. He quickly wiped at them, trying not to allow Daniel to notice, but that moment stayed in his mind. As the center started to form, more volunteers come forward to help. Local contractors offered their work at discounted prices, displaced residents were painting walls and planting trees, and even the employees of Tesla would drive down during the weekends to lend a hand. The site has become a hive of activity, buzzing with a sense of purpose that seemed to uplift everyone's spirits. He ended up working quite closely with families around the region, listening to their stories, and making sure the center really reflected their needs. One elderly widow, Gloria, shared a story of having lost not just her home but also the community she had worked on for so long. This center, she told Marco, isn't just about rebuilding. It's about reminding us that we're not alone. Her words stuck with him, and he often repeated them to his team during the harder days. By the time construction was complete, the center was a beacon of hope rising from the ashes. Its sleek, modern design of Tesla's originality contrasted the surrounding ruins. It was warm and inviting due to large windows that allowed natural lighting and light walls painted in soft colors. The grand opening would be a day Marco wouldn't easily forget. Hundreds of people gathered under a cloudless sky, filled with mixture of anticipation and celebration in the air. Marco stood on the small stage with Adriana and the kids by his side, his heart pounding as he looked out at the crowd. Survivors, volunteers, and community leaders all had come to witness the moment. Elon Musk joined him on stage, looking simply as he always does. He handed Marco an oversized pair of scissors for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Taking the microphone, Musk spoke to the crowd. "This center represents more than just a building," he said. "It represents resilience, community, and the power of coming together. And none of this would have been possible without Marco. His story inspired this project, and his leadership made it a reality." Marco felt the weight of those words as the crowd erupted in applause. He stepped forward, his hands steady despite the rush of emotions. With one clean cut, the ribbon fell, and the crowd cheered louder than ever. Inside, the center came alive immediately. Families explored the spaces, children ran to the playroom, and volunteers helped visitors sign up for counseling sessions and job training programs. Marco stood in the middle of it all, taking it in. Adriana squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "You did it," she whispered. "We made it," he replied, voice full of tears. But what hit him deep in the throat was when the eldest, Sophia, pulled him by the elbow. "Dad," she said, reaching out and indicating a plaque along the side door. It said, "In memory to all those that lost so much and for the people that stood in unison, in rebuilding." Marco had difficulty catching breath. This was not just a building, it was a legacy, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. But Marco knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the impact on people's lives, was just starting, and he was ready to be there every step of the way. The weeks following, some of the busiest days in Marco's life came from the grand opening of the community center. It was a building, but for many it became a lifeline. Every day, families were streaming into it, trying to find assistance on everything from getting housing to jobs. Children were playing in bright, cheerful rooms as parents attended workshops about rebuilding their lives. Counselors provided support to those who were suffering emotionally from the disaster, and volunteers kept the food pantry full. Marco made a point to be there as much as possible, not just to oversee operations but to connect with the people whose lives the center was impacting. One afternoon, as he walked through the main hall, he noticed a teenage boy sitting alone near the library. He gazed blankly at a pile of unread books. Marco went over to him and sat down beside him. "You okay?" Marco asked, his voice gentle. The boy shrugged. "We lost everything. I don't even know where to start anymore." Marco nodded, understanding those words. "It's hard, isn't it?" "Been there. Loses everything, feels like the floor's been torn out from underneath you." The boy looked at him, curiosity lighting up his face. "How'd you make it through?" Marco smiled faintly. "One step at a time and by letting people help me, even when I thought I didn't deserve it. This place, it's here for you. For all of us to start over." The boy nodded slightly, and for the first time, Marco saw a glimmer of hope in his expression. Moments like these reminded Marco why the center mattered. But it wasn't about helping others. The center had transformed Marco, too. He went from feeling hopeless after the wildfire to discovering a strength he never knew he had. Adriana reminded him constantly of how much he'd grown. "You always had a heart of gold, but now it's all everybody gets to witness," she had said one evening in which they found themselves sitting next to each other on the Tesla facility porch with news stories spreading about this success center. Marco's story even received national notice. Journalists visited Santa Clarita to help share the newsworthy story around the world at large. Donations just kept coming and enabled expansions to the facility and the funding of new programs. He was invited to speak at community events, sharing his journey and lessons learned along the way. Marco talked about the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the value of compassion. Sometimes, he told one audience, we don't realize how much we need each other until everything is taken away. This center isn't just about rebuilding homes, it's about rebuilding hope. One of the most poignant moments came at an event at the memorial garden within the center. Survivors gathered there to share stories and honor loved ones who hadn't survived the disaster. Marco listened as Gloria, the elderly widow he had met during construction, spoke of losing her husband of 50 years in the fire. This place, she said, her voice shaking, gave me a reason to keep going. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's light. Hearing her words, Marco felt a lump rise in his throat. He came to understand that the center was not just a symbol of resilience for the community but a symbol of resilience for him too. Months turned into years, and the center became an integral part of the community. It expanded its vocational training programs, mental health services, and even partnerships with local schools. Marco remained very active and actively mentored younger leadership to keep the center true to its cause. One day, Sophia turned around and asked him a question that totally caught him off guard. Papa, are you happy? Marco paused and looked at her thoughtful expression. Yeah, he said after a moment. I think I am. But it is not the type of happy that I thought I would have, he continued. It's better. It's knowing that what we've been through didn't break us. It made us stronger. As he said so, Marco learned all the truth about those words. The wildfire had taken everything from his family and himself, but it had also given him a sense of purpose he had never imagined. In a quiet moment at the center, Marco stood near the entrance and read the plaque again, in honor of all those who lost so much and for the community that rose together to rebuild. He smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of peace. If Marco's story has touched you, remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can create ripples that change lives. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, hope, and inspiration, and share this with someone who needs it today.